Thanks for getting on to the Tuesday edition of Vogan's European Outlook for the 15th of November. We've reached the middle portion of the month, and the Mandjelian Oscillation, as has been highlighted here for quite some time, is going through phases 6 and into 7, and we've seen that back during the month of September, and the Arctic Oscillation is expected to go negative as we go through the second half of November here. So as you can see here, remember back to what happened in September. We're seeing an uptick in tropical cyclone activity. We of course had systems pushing to the north like Fiona. Then we're seeing blocking taking place, and the second half of September was of course the coldest for the British Isles since 2012. Then we've seen the Arctic Oscillation going positive during the month of October. And now, with the Mandjelian Oscillation going into 6 and 7, we're almost seeing a bit of a repeat of what we had back during September, where the Arctic Oscillation is going back negative once again. North Atlantic Oscillation was negative, as you can see here, for the most part during the month of September. A pretty significant dip notice here during the first week of September. And that was, of course, the big turnaround in precipitation distribution over Western Europe. We've seen that flip around between very dry, very warm, versus increasingly cold or cool. But the big story was the wetness. And we're going back to the September pattern. The big difference is, of course, we've now skipped 2 months. And at this time of the year, when you've got the setup that we had back in September now occurring potentially at the end of November into early December, we need to look out, of course, for increased cold. But we've got the battle. We've got the battle between the strong westerlies coming across the Atlantic and building high pressure over Scandinavia that is going to be trying to turn more of an east to northeasterly flow over Eastern Europe. So we're going to start to import colder air from Siberia westwards. But the UK actually finds itself almost beneath an imaginary wall within the atmosphere, because basically the UK, according to some of the later runs of the GFS and the ECMWF, indicate that we continue to see this barrage of Atlantic low pressure and frontal systems moving across the British Isles. But I'll show you in just a second how these systems bump up against that high and then get forced north. You only have to look actually at the total accumulated precipitation of the GFS. Now, if we play through the loop, it's quite interesting what's going on here. Pay attention to the way the model prints out the rainfall, and notice here in particular that the heaviest rainfall does not get farther east than, say Denmark and southern portions of Norway here for the most part, certainly over the next week or so. Notice that here, and then it almost kind of backs up. So the rainfall that starts to accumulate, and the model's printing that out, is actually backing almost westwards, which is quite strange to see. But it's all thanks to this wall of high pressure over Scandinavia, and of course this hose pipe, or this train of Atlantic low pressure that is going to continue to try to push eastwards, is coming up against the resistance of high pressure over the continent and forcing areas of low pressure northwards here. And you can see that here. We're going to have some fairly significant rainfall up the eastern side of Scotland, so Fife, Tayside, up into Aberdeenshire, up into Caithness and Sutherland. Those areas, those upslope areas facing to the south and southeast, are going to get quite the soaking, I think, in the coming days. You can see here we've got this push of Atlantic moisture coming in over the British Isles. It's bumping up against the high and it's getting deflected northwards here. So I think in essence what is happening is this push of air mass off the Atlantic, and of course the area of high pressure over the continent is getting forced further and further north. And in essence, it's going to then trigger the North Atlantic Oscillation to go negative. Now, if you notice here off the CFSV2 weeklies, this has been something I've been showing you, and it's interesting what we're seeing. This is day 1 through 7. There's the big area of high pressure over Scandinavia. There's the deep low with the conga line of areas of low pressure moving in off the Atlantic. That, in essence, is forcing the high further north, and we're keeping an eye on the Alaska Ridge, which, of course, is allowing a discharge of Arctic air into the central and eastern United States. Do the two link up? Now, you notice here, this is week 2. We'll lose the ridge over Alaska. Therefore, we start to raise heights over the United States. We warm things up here. But in turn, does warming things up over the United States then refocus the cold over Europe, over Western Europe, over Eastern Europe more, should I say? That's a good question. And what I will say is, as you look at week 3, week 4, week 5, we're seeing that negative Arctic oscillation, negative North Atlantic oscillation. The important thing to remember, though, folks, is do we get the cold? We get the pattern, but do we have cold air to tap from eastern portions of Europe into the western portions of Europe? At this very moment in time, we have a battleground, so to speak. What's happening is we've got areas of low pressure coming in from the west. We've got colder air coming in from the east. The question is, we could have a great setup taking place, but the setup is that the Atlantic air mass and that boundary separating continental versus oceanic and Atlantic stays to the east of the UK. So in essence, we do not see the cold coming in fully to the UK. Now, if you notice here off the latest run of the GFS, we've got a setup taking place that initially, now this is very interesting, this is where we need to be very careful, and I need to be very careful as a forecaster to not get sucked into the model, to the individual model run. This is a perfect example. So by the time we reach the end of the month, the previous run indicated that we had an area of high pressure centered right up over northwestern portions of Europe, and we had the Atlantic coming in from the east, and we had almost that continuous upper air flow coming all the way close to the British Isles. This latest run indicates that we do not see that. But the fundamental aspect to remember is the fact that the pattern, sorry, I'm losing my place here. The fundamental aspect of the pattern is that we are likely trending towards a negative Arctic oscillation, North Atlantic oscillation, but that doesn't guarantee cold. It doesn't guarantee snow. And that's what we need to be very careful with here, because we only have to remember back to last Christmas. Remember how close it got, yet it stayed so far from our shores. And I'm being cautious about getting sucked in. The modelling is going to come back and forth here as we progress through the second half of the month. It is going to bring excitement. It is going to get us, all psyched up with regard to these cold runs starting to show up, especially if we do properly get that negative AO NAO signal. Doesn't matter, and we can have the perfect setup, but we don't get we basically don't get the prize, so to speak. Looking at the CFSV2, this is the precipitation anomaly here, so a very, very wet upcoming 7-day period compared to normal, as you can see here. So this month is going to definitely wind up pretty darn wet indeed. This is week 2, so this takes us to the very end of the month. Notice here we're starting to dry slightly up across the north of Scotland. We're drier further north. Precipitation then coming down underneath, as of course heights rise to the north. We're forcing the jet stream and the storm track further south. Worth keeping an eye on. But do we get that southward track of systems, the building of pressure to the north, and we start turning the mid and upper levels in reverse and then start to transport air in from the east? That is going to be, of course, the big question. But it is looking more positive. It is looking more positive, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to get the cold pattern here. So this is my thoughts for this evening anyway, and we'll have to keep a close eye on things as we go through the next week or two. So thanks for watching today. I appreciate it. Please like, share, and if you haven't already done so, hit that subscribe button. And I'll see you again next time with more.